Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of the Big East Rewind. I am your host, Chuck Everson, and my co-host, as always, is my main man, Sonny Spera from Syracuse University. How are you, Sonny?
Chuck, I'm doing great. This is a great guest and a great show. We've been trying to get this together for a little while, and
yeah,
today's the day, man. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, listen, I mean, Dan is I would say the quintessential key to this whole Big East puzzle that we've been putting together piece by piece. You know, his dad, Dave, put everything together. So Dan currently is the senior vice president of basketball at the NCAA. That means he's in charge of everything March Madness, Sonny. So we're going to get into some of that too, I hope, you know.
Yeah.
And as stated, he is the son of Big East founding father, Dave Gavitt. Please welcome Dan Gavitt to the show. How are you, Dan?
Welcome, Dan.
Great,
how are you?
Chuck.
Hey, there you are. Okay.
Terrific. Good to be with you guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. We really appreciate you taking time. I know, you know, once the season starts, that's your busy time, and everything goes a little crazy for you down there at the NCAA. So thanks for taking a few minutes to hang with us a little bit today.
No, my pleasure. It's great to be with you, and good to have a season underway.
Yeah, it is good to have a season underway. It's a lot better watching the games, I got to be honest with you, with a full crowd. I mean, it was like watching a scrimmage last year when the teams were playing. It was tough.
Huge difference. You know, we had last year, we hadn't even started the season yet. As you know, we delayed it by 2 weeks because of testing requirements and all. And you know, when we did start, there were no fans, so it was like playing, you know, in empty gyms. And man, I've been to some games already, and what a difference it is to have fans and bands and cheerleaders back in the building.
Yeah, you can kind of feel it through the TV too. I mean, you know, when you see it, you see the people going crazy in the stands like that used to be, like it should be, getting back to some normalcy. And it really is nice to see. It makes the game a lot more fun to watch, you know?
No doubt. And better for the players. You know, I felt so badly for the players last year. You know, they competed hard. It was great they had a season, but man, you know, they missed the energy of the crowd for sure.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. So jumping in here. Dan, you know, let's start out, because I know you got some time constraints today. So let's talk about, you know, your family and your dad in particular, and talk about growing up in the Gavitt family with Dave as your dad, and talk a little bit about how you you know, got involved with all the projects that you were involved with.
Well, he was an even better dad than he was a coach or administrator. Just an incredible guy. Been gone 10 years now. It's hard to believe.
I can't believe that. Yeah.
10th anniversary was in September. He was, you know, just a very fun guy, an incredible dad. Really, you know, he always had a real youthful enthusiasm. You know, even our high school friends and college friends, and when they would come over to the house, they always would, you know, he was easy to mess around with. He loved messing around with them, and vice versa. And he was a very engaging guy, as I think you all know. You know, it's why I think he was so well liked and respected and successful, because he could relate to coaches and players and referees, and certainly athletic directors and presidents when he put together the conference. And he loved people. He just loved, you know, kind of holding court. Nothing he loved more than being at a game and holding court before the game with coaches and referees or whomever was around, and then going out for a dinner afterwards, and telling stories. And he was a real people person. And it was incredible, you know, to think back that, you know, he was my brother and I's dad, on top of all the great things he did in the game. He was just a really normal guy and down to earth guy who had enormous success in the game of basketball.
What was he like? I mean, I just get this image of a guy who literally is spinning 20 plates, and he's keeping them all going, and he's paying equal attention across the board. Especially here, you talk about him being a great father. No surprise. And because everybody talks with just great reverence, you know, like we've interviewed a bunch of coaches, and immediately when you start to talk about Dave Gavitt, they smile, and they just, there's a warmth that comes over them that they can't, they're bubbly, even guys that are stoic. And so I could just imagine like his desk with 8,000 Post-it notes, and just talk a little bit, because I think he was a genius in how he was able to put this entire thing together and it exists and it blossoms because of him. So talk a little bit about that process.
Sure. You know,
Right.
as I think about him and remember him, you know, a couple things stand out. One, and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, it's kind of, but he was a very, very smart guy, you know, a brilliant guy, really, in many ways. He didn't come
Genius.
across that way. You know, he didn't, you know, come across as smarter than anybody else in the room, but he really was. I mean, he was a bright guy, had an incredible vision for the future, which is why he put together the conference and knew that it could be successful with the media markets and the traditional programs, and that needed to be, you know, together rather than independence. He also had an incredible ability to kind of delegate, and you know, you talked about having Mike Tranghese on earlier. You know, he had incredible staff at the Big East: Mike Tranghese, Tom McElroy, Linda Bruno, Chris Plonsky, and he used his staff and got them, you know, delegated to them to do things. He had ideas, he had a vision, and then he had folks that were really talented that helped to you know, bring that vision to fruition. One of the things I've been really remarked about as my career has advanced is at times I just, you know, kind of feel overwhelmed with some of the responsibilities that I have and trying to manage all the different things around the tournament and the work at the NCAA and all. He never like seemed to be overwhelmed by things. His ability to manage, as you know, Sonny, like multiple projects and many balls in the air without, you know, having it take away from family and friends and other interests. In many ways, I felt like he accomplished more the later he got in his career and worked a little bit less even. You know, he was a great golfer. He loved to golf. He loved to travel and have dinners out with friends and family. And he was able to fit all that in as he was accomplishing all these incredible things around the Big East and the game overall. So real capacity for getting things done by delegating and having great staff. And then just a really engaging person. I love being around people. He was a real people person. And I think that was a lot of it was the result of him being a really smart guy.
You know, one of the things that came shining through on some of the interviews that we've done throughout the show that we've been doing is his ability to cultivate relationships, you know, either with coaches, with players, with people that work for him or with him. You know, talk about that for a minute, because he, you know, he was kind of ahead of it, not kind of, he was ahead of his time.
He was way ahead of his time.
Way ahead. You know, you know, if two guys didn't get along, they found themselves in the golf cart together, two coaches. If you know, if you know, he knew that the Big East was going to be a tough battle every night. So what did he do at the Big East tournament? We had the luncheon, and there was guys from each team at the table. You know, so talk about how he the way he cultivated relationships.
Yeah, I think it would really all stem from his ability as a coach. You know, people remember more probably as the founder of the Big East and president of USA Basketball and with the Celtics and all, but he was first and foremost a coach and a very, very successful one. You know, he coached the 1980 U.S. Olympic team. Right. He coached a team to the Final Four in 1973. His team perennially won 20 games a year. And so I think his ability to read people, to bring them together, was a result of him being a good coach, a good teacher. He taught as well as coached, and so he had that ability to kind of bring out the best in people and to resolve issues. You know, his players talk about him that he was one of those guys that didn't treat everybody equally. He treated everybody fairly, but he knew that there were differences in the way players were made up and what motivated them, and so he pushed the buttons that needed to be pushed to get them to fulfill their potential and to get the best out of an entire team. And I think the same can be said probably of him as an administrator. I think, you know, one of the things that was really beneficial and part of the reason why he was able, I think, to get so many strong personalities to agree to form a conference like the Big East is that coaching background. You know, so he had coached against Boeheim and Louis, and he had coached John Thompson as an assistant coach and coached against Rowley. And so they all respected him as a coach. And he knew, you know, how to talk to them in terms of what would be needed to be successful, trying to emulate the ACC tournament and, do things that would help coaches recruit players, keep players in the Northeast, and be able to compete at a national level for national championships. And so he was able to communicate that vision. And then, of course, when it all came together, they saw it come to fruition right away. And I think that underscored his vision.
So I have to ask you, did he ever talk or ever bring some, I don't know how involved you were with it in the early 80s, but the personalities of the coaches were really larger than life for sure.
To say the least.
Yeah. So did he ever bring like some of that information back, or like say, oh my God, I had John Thompson and Jim Boeheim on to, did he ever talk about some of those things, or anything you recollect that came up like at the dinner table,
Oh yeah, absolutely. He would tell stories all the time. And then, he loved spending time with people outside of the business too. So he would, regularly play golf with some of those guys, travel with them. You probably know some of the stories of, they had an annual trip to Ireland and Scotland to play golf.
Never heard that.
Some of the regulars on that, yeah, they had a trip that that he organized every year, and some of the regulars on that were Jim Boeheim, PJ Carlissimo, and Gary Williams, Tom Jernstedt from the NCAA, and John Havlicek, and he was the kind of one that brought all that together. And so, yeah, we have a home on Cape Cod that has been our family for a long time, and belonged to a great golf course down there. So he would frequently bring coaches there for a day or two of golf and a dinner or two. And he loved the company of others, and that was part of So we didn't just hear the stories, Sonny. We saw some of them firsthand of these characters that would come in to visit, and then of course the stories about the Big East annual meeting, and ultimately Ponte Vedra Beach was where they settled, but they moved it around in the early years there in Bermuda and different places. And as Chuck noted, when they were very intentional, my dad and my mom actually, as part of the partnership that they had so strong, they were very intentional about social events and golf, and who rode in what golf carts together, and who sat at what tables for dinner together. And if there was a conflict or a fight during the season, you can be sure that those coaches who had a recruiting battle going on or something else would be sitting next to each other, and he'd ask them and encourage them to work out their differences in June or July rather than during the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable because, like I said, everybody has talked about that, and you would never think, let me put these two guys who are bickering in the meetings, I'll put them in the cart, and then the next meeting they came in, there was no more bickering. So it seems so simple, right? But at the time when you're in the middle of all that stuff, it's difficult. Talk about to us, Danny, if you will, talk about the vision that your father had, because to me, he set goals like a lot of people set goals, but then he had the vision to see it through right to the end. Like he knew that the Big East tournament was going to start out in Providence, and then it was going to go to Syracuse, and then Hartford. Ewing comes in the league, we're going to the Garden, and we've been at the Garden ever since. So talk about his vision and how he worked, all behind the scenes to put everything together to form
all those pieces.
Yeah,
it's a lot of pieces.
Well, it speaks again, I think, to his intelligence and vision, and then his coaching background, because I think his vision for the conference, it really all started when he was coaching, and he was trying to recruit guys to Providence College, and he was losing them in many cases, even though they were one of the very best programs in the Northeast. He was losing them to ACC schools and to Big Ten schools because they were part of a conference. And in the ACC's case, they had the ACC tournament, which is a huge deal in Greensboro. And when he was losing these recruits, not just at Providence, but other Northeast independent schools like Villanova and Syracuse and St. John's, when they were losing guys out of New York and Philly and DC, he realized that part of the reason they were losing them is because they weren't part of a conference. They didn't have a conference tournament, and that they'd all be better if they came together as a conference. The other, that was kind of from his coaching background, but from his kind of business background and vision, in the early days, even before cable television had started, he knew it was coming. and knew that if they could get all these schools from major media markets like Boston and New York and Philly and DC, that there would be great media value in having those schools together in those media markets. And, you know, as I think everyone remembers, the conference started in 1979, which is exactly the same year that ESPN started. You know, ESPN was looking for content. They were looking for games to put on the air. The Big East was looking for exposure of those games. And so that wasn't by coincidence. He recognized that television and cable was going to be something that could benefit programs and help with recruiting and exposing programs. And so that was and not a lot of coaches probably have that kind of business acumen, but he had both. He had the coaching background and recruiting, and then he had that, that business savvy that was pretty brilliant in hindsight.
Yeah.
What was your involvement, Dan, early on? I mean, what was your involvement with things?
Well, I was pretty young at the time. I was 13 in 1979. So I was, ball boy level at that point, in the Big East tournament and all. And, we travel obviously to the tournament and, to Chuck's point, he absolutely had a vision for having the Big East tournament in Madison Square Garden, where he had coached and been to so many NITs and other events over the years. But he also knew that it was not a guarantee and not something that you could do, prematurely. So, that's why they had the tournament in those other 3 locations in the early years, not confident yet that you could sell out the Garden, make a big deal. But the story is famous, and it's very true that when John Thompson signed Patrick Ewing at Georgetown, that was the time. He knew then that it was time to take the Big East, after 3 years of success in other tournament locations, to the Garden, and that the league was mature enough with the quality of players, not just Patrick, but Chris Mullen and Eddie Pinckney and others that would take it uptown. And of course, the rest is history. It's been an incredible tournament at the Garden for 40 years.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that comes up all the time too. The guys still remember the electricity of being in that Final Four weekend. Those 4 teams, especially as you got closer to the championship game, it was really something special. I mean, not a lot of people have gotten to experience that from a player coaching's, on the floor type of perspective. I mean, there's nothing like, you can't even describe it,
Yeah, and it really is 40 years. I mean, we think back to those early years, St. John's won in 83, and of course your team, Chuck, in 85 that went on to win the national championship. And, but I was in Milwaukee on Monday night for the Marquette Illinois game, and I ran to Pat Connaughton, who plays for the Bucks, won a championship, there and played at Notre Dame. And I said, reintroduced myself to him, told him I used to work at the Big East, run the Big East tournament, now run March Madness. And the very first thing that Pat said to me is, man, the Big East tournament was the best. Like, if you would get to Friday night in the semifinals, and this is just 10 years ago, this isn't 40 years ago. He played, at Notre Dame 10 years ago, and he remembered right away what a big deal it was, to play in the semifinals at the Garden. And that year, I think back to one of the years I was working at the conference office in 2011, and that was the year that UConn went on to win the national championship.
Right.
And they were a 9 seed in the Big East tournament, a 9 seed. And the teams that advanced to the Final Four that year, they weren't as highly ranked in the national championship as the 4 teams that advanced to the Big East semifinals that year. So it's stunning how successful the league has been for 40 years, each decade having its own kind of, stories to tell, but the quality has been off the charts.
Yeah, it's been incredible. If you look back, from the beginnings of the conference, I think in the first 6 years, we've had 2 national champions and 4 or 5 different teams in the Final Four, we go on, then after that, then the UConns and the Syracuses and all these other teams have won. I mean, in such a short period of time. I don't think anybody, including Dave, thought that would happen. But I mean, incredible. And then it just took off like a rocket ship, you know. Talk about when he started this thing, you know, you said that ESPN came about the same time as the Big East Conference, which, you know, is true. But talk about him having the foresight to go to that place. You know, he sent Mike Tranghese down, and Mike said it was like a, you know, somebody's house burned down, like a trailer that he went to, and went in and talked to these guys about a TV contract. You know, Dave told him go out and get a contract, so he did. And talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, there were trailers in Bristol, Connecticut back then, not the, you know,
Yeah,
the campus that they have there now. But it was just, you know, a symbiotic relationship. The conference needed to get games on television. There weren't a lot of opportunities. Yeah, ESPN was desperate for something rather other than slow pitch softball, and you know, they needed something to get quality games on the air. And that's, you know, Big Monday was one of the first kind of franchises that they dreamed up together. And so you had, you know, like the success of Monday Night Football in the NFL over the years, you had these incredible matchups on Monday nights that went nationally, you know, coast to coast. And that's why, you know, programs like Syracuse, Sonny, you know, ended up with players from California on their team because they would watch those games on Monday. They were national broadcasts. And you know, the other story that people don't remember probably or little told, aside from the ESPN exposure, the Big East back in those days created their own television network. You know, we know that the television networks today, like the Big Ten Network and the SEC Network and the ACC Network, are, you know, big, huge operations done in partnership with ESPN and others. But the Big East Network back in those days was kind of a mom and pop operation where they syndicated games. They would go into marketplaces like Philly and Syracuse and negotiate syndicated packages on the local stations. And they would go out and sell the advertising. Decon rat poison was one of the original advertisers because they couldn't get anybody, you know, reputable to advertise back in those days. But they did it all. They sold the advertising. They did all the production. My dad, among others, was an analyst on the games. You know, Mike Gorman was the lead play-by-play guy. But that was a big part of their success as well. Not just the ESPN national windows, but to have so many games broadcast in the local marketplaces of the Big East teams that helped in recruiting and helped to develop their brands to be national.
yeah.
Yeah, it was, and we have had some certain people talk about that. Now, as the TV and the media starts to increase, where, you know, for yourself, Dan, I mean, where were you thinking, hey, I can do? Were you thinking along the lines, because you're introduced to all this? What were you starting to get some ideas on maybe I could do this, or your dad? My guess is your dad was giving you some ideas and suggestions and planting some seeds and helping, you know, kind of develop maybe a strategy for yourself. Talk a little bit about your strategy moving forward.
Yeah, he was subtle in those ways, though, Sonny. He didn't he didn't strong arm you. You know, he did everything. Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, and that was whether it was family or coaches or whatever. He always had this way of kind of planting seeds in your head, and then all of a sudden it was your idea when it really wasn't. It was his idea. So I coming out of college, I really wanted to teach and coach at a high school level, and follow in his footsteps in that way, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't able to find a job in the secondary school level, but I did ultimately get a job working for Rick Barnes as a graduate assistant coach at Providence College, and was there for 6 years working for Rick. Learned a ton about coaching, about the game. Did a lot of administrative things because we had a very small staff and it was a small school. And so, I did a lot of the business stuff with the athletic administrators and recruiting coordination and academic support and you name it. And all that kind of helped give me experience that led me to be an athletic director one day, and then a conference office administrator, and then ultimately my job at the NCAA. So it all kind of started with, love of the game from having been exposed to it throughout my whole life with him, my dad, but then opportunities along the way that just kind of built on themselves in relationships and experiences that all add up to me having some level of effectiveness, hopefully at the national level.
So I know you're being very humble, but you're running March Madness. So, and that's something that there is no other event in any sport like March Madness. I don't care what anybody tells you. And it's joyous. I mean, the people that are involved and everything like that, talk about what some of those responsibilities are. That's a lot of weight on your shoulders. So what does that look like?
Well, I'm really fortunate to have the opportunity. The tournament's over 80 years old, and there's been so many great people that have worked on it, built it to where it is today. I feel like I'm a, part-time steward of that with my staff, and trying to continue to grow it and make it better each year, and yet also not screw it up. I think having the experience of helping to run the Big East tournament for the 7 years I was at the conference office was huge in my now ability to bring some of those experiences to bear with March Madness. It is, my very first year. I'd been to probably 20 Final Fours before I started working at the NCAA, but when I finally did start in 2012 at the NCAA, I had a deeper appreciation right away for how complex the event is, and how many people need to be involved to pull it off and make it successful. And we're really blessed to have an incredible staff at the NCAA of people that are really good and experienced at what they do. And I realized, like, my very first year, that, man, while I had a good picture overall of what the event was all about, there were so many components to it that I didn't totally get. That really, it's kind of like a big team. Everybody's got a role to play, and if they don't play their role well, the thing doesn't work. And so, we have a pretty coordinated team effort, and we have great TV partners in CBS and Turner, and an incredible basketball committee, that runs the tournament. My dad was the chair way back in the middle of the 80s, and so it's been built well over the years. We try to make improvements each year and make it better. It's a great and fun thing to be part of. I kind of pinch myself sometimes that, we're involved, like you said, Sonny, with, I think, the greatest event in the country, certainly the greatest basketball event in the country. And it never fails to deliver.
Talk about for a minute, Dan, last year you guys overcame, something that nobody anticipated happening, having the entire tournament, first, who came up with the idea to have it all in Indianapolis? And second, how did that work out for the bubble? I didn't hear of a lot of people getting sick and missing games and stuff. You didn't hear much about it. So I cannot believe that you guys were able to pull that off to such a degree and still have the tournament. That was an incredible job.
Well, thanks. It was an incredible team effort. I mean, it went from the greatest disappointment in my career, probably when the 2020 tournament was canceled, to one of the greatest kind of feelings of accomplishment to pull off the 2021 tournament. And it was a result of a lot of creative thinking over an entire spring, summer, and fall, during the start of the pandemic, looking at what the NBA did, the WNBA, Major League Baseball, and Major League Soccer, and you name it, just trying to learn from others that had been able to get restarted and how they were able to do it. Tons of discussions with medical experts and event operators as to what you would need to consider. And then we have a great medical advisory group at the NCAA that helped to formulate a plan. Joanne Scott, who's our managing director of the tournament, and my right hand, is probably as influential and key as anybody in developing the idea of having the tournament in one location. One thing that we realized right away in looking at all these other events that have been successful is that moving around and being in multiple locations and traveling was not going to work, because each location had different COVID protocols. And so, having the tournament 14 locations where teams would have to move after each round and travel was just not going to work. And so a single location made the most sense. We were fortunate the Final Four was scheduled to be in Indianapolis, because while there may have been some other locations that could have managed it and handled it, Indy is so experienced. It's where the NCAA is headquartered. We have so many tournaments in Indianapolis from first and second rounds through the Final Four, that great partners, great local institutions that helped. pull it off, like Indiana and Purdue and Butler and the Pacers organization. So it was a labor of love. It was not an easy thing to pull off, but it ended up being, like you said, Chuck, pretty highly successful.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we had one team that was impacted. VCU had, many positives and was unable to participate because of that. But that was the only team. It only affected one game. We had, I think, only, a handful of positives across the entire 3 weeks, and nobody got very sick, fortunately. And, we got incredible tournament with the two best teams, and Baylor and Gonzaga advanced all the way to the championship game. And it was very gratifying. And more than anything, I was just so happy for the players. You may recall there were so many players that were on the fence as to whether they should go pro or not, like there are every year. But the guys like Ayo DeSumo and the guys from Baylor, Jared Butler, and we were really highly motivated to give them the opportunity to play in the tournament, because they came back. Corey Kispert at Gonzaga, they came back to have the chance to play in the tournament, and that really drove our creative thinking about how we're going to be able to do it and provide them the opportunity to play for national championship.
What's it like, Dan, in that room, and you're going over the tournament? Now it's 68 teams, right? So what's it like sorting all of that out and coming up with the brackets that becomes the tournament?
Well, it's the committee's work. There's 10 committee members now. It's 12. We just expanded it to 12, and we're in the room to help support them and provide some historical perspective on all of it. Make sure we're following our principles and procedures. But we don't get a vote, but we're there to help support. And it's a cool experience to be in the room. Like any of us that are fans and do it as amateurs, just out of interest. To be in the room where those actual decisions are being made is pretty cool. It's a lengthy process. It started a week ago. These guys, they and women that are on the committee, they watch games from the very first night of the season, and they bring all that, the collective observation and all the statistics and analytics to those meetings, and they make the most informed decisions they can, and do it a hell of a job. It's not easy to pick 36 at-large teams and then seed all 68 and then put them into the bracket. But they do a really good job. I think the thing that probably people would be most surprised about the whole process is that the committee starts meeting on Wednesday, and of course they're done by Sunday afternoons for the selection show on Sunday night with a completed bracket. Most of that time is spent on selecting and seeding the field. The bracket doesn't come together, actually isn't even started until Sunday morning. And that's a pretty automated process that puts the bracket together. And everybody always thinks like, well, there's, they conveniently put together, games between, Rick Pitino at Louisville and Jim Boeheim at Syracuse because they used to coach together, or that just doesn't happen because there's not time, nor opportunity to do that. But it's a great thing to be part of. It's a fun thing to be part of, but it is stressful because you just want to make sure you got no mistakes before that bracket's released on Sunday night. The tournament's underway.
I got to ask you a question now. From Wednesday to Sunday, with that many personalities, do you have to give anybody a Gavitt timeout? You have to put anybody together. Listen, you two are eating lunch together, and you're going to work it out. Like, has that come up?
Oh yeah, definitely. Strong personalities, and there can be very hot debates that happen, which is good. It's good for the process, and you just hope it's respectful. It almost always is, and get to the right outcome. But yeah, there's some refereeing that goes on, Sonny, sometimes in the room.
Would you like to share any of those stories with us?
in my book when I'm retired, I'll share them.
That's good.
All right, we'll have you back on. We got to hear the book. We got to promote the book.
There you go.
I guess you got to be part coach, part referee, part psychologist, part a little bit of everything in that room, right, Dan?
I try to be. I mean, I feel good that the committee has been respectful and appreciates my counsel for what it's worth. learned from my dad, I guess. I speak infrequently. I do a lot of listening and observing, and so I think they respect when I have something to say that is of value, and they'll ask for it, or I'll offer it up. Ultimately, it's their decision on anything that happens with the tournament. But like Tom Jernstedt did so skillfully for over 30 years at the NCAA in this role, I try to just provide support so the committee can be successful, and hopefully we've had some success doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's some of them. I mean, some of the conversations you must have, like, you know, towards the end when, you know, you got teams that were on the bubble and they didn't make it in, you know, then you have to defend your crew, your team. You can't, you know, so that's got to be difficult for you too when you're getting bombarded with questions of how come this team didn't make it in and they had one more win than that team, and you know, so I mean, I guess you really have to be versed in how the committee came up with the decisions that came up with so that you can defend it either way, you know, when the media gets to you after the bracket comes out.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think over the years, like my predecessors, we've worked hard to make the process just a little better each year. And one of the things I think hopefully I've been able to add with our staff is just that over the last 10 years of being involved with this, I recognize that we need to build a record of why decisions were made during the process, so that we have good scripted talking points and rationale for those decisions for the committee chair during Selection Sunday, the selection show, and then thereafter. Because, you know, if you don't take good notes and create a good record as to why decisions were made during the week, it's so exhausting, the process. You can kind of forget or lack clarity in your explanation of those decisions. And so we've done a good job to create some processes so that when we get to Sunday night, we have a really good record of why decisions were made. You can debate them, you can argue them, that's all well and good, but at least they're sound and they're based on what the votes were and the discussion was from the committee when the committee chair represents that information to coaches, to fans, and to student athletes.
So it's like you're trying to avoid that fighter who has a flurry in the last 20 seconds of a round, automatically wins the round. You might have forgot the first 2.5 minutes. So, right. So you really have to make sure that you do your due diligence, but you don't lose sight of what went into all that. So that's just great, you know, great to hear.
Well, I tell you,
no question, you know, and this goes, Chuck.
No, go ahead.
No, there's frequent questions about like, you know, about games that are, because we all live in this moment, right, where things that happen right in front of us in real time are what we remember most.
Yep.
And so, you know, we get frequent questions from media and from teams about games that happen during conference championship week, and they're obviously considered. Every single game is considered, but they're not given greater weight than games that happen in February or January. You know, so you take this season-long approach to evaluating teams, and just because there's an upset during a conference, it may impact seeding a little bit or selection, but in often cases it doesn't, because it's just one of 30 plus games that have been played, and it's not fair to overweight those games versus a conference game on the road, you know, with a rival in the middle of February or January.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to give you a little chance here. You can deflect it or you can answer it, whatever you feel like. What is your opinion of the bracketologists?
Well, they're great for the promotion of the tournament and for fans' interest.
Right.
You know, they really do a great job of getting fans, you know, engaged and thinking about the tournament, and you know, yet they, you know, they tend to sensationalize the process, and what I just said is an example of, you know, the weight of one game versus another, and you know, and that's television for you in a good way. Like, you know, you kind of sensationalize something and say, wow, this team won tonight, so they're in, and this team lost tonight, so they're out. That's never the case. There's never one game that either gets a team in or out of the tournament until the resume is complete and you can look at it in its totality. Certainly games in the last couple weeks of the season, like, you know, can have significant bearing on a team's resume. But that's the only thing that, you know, makes me cringe a little bit in terms of the understanding of the process is it doesn't work like that. But overall, Sonny, I think bracketologists are great for the game and for the tournament because it helps to promote it and it gets discussion going and debate. And that's what we all love about college basketball.
So
Well-
Dan, we got your address, so I'm going to just mail you a little something, maybe a little something to just keep you on the orange thinking, early,
Yeah.
and then you won't forget about it in March. And, we'll use that philosophy and we'll grease it a little bit,
If you hung out with Sonny more, Dan, you couldn't help but think orange. Everything the guy owns is orange.
No,
So it's-
look at Chuck. Look where he's sitting. He's sitting in the Villanova throne for Pete's sake. Right?
So I have to say though, Dan, I mean, that is the most exciting time of the year for any sports fan, whether you're a basketball head like, Sonny and I are, or just a casual fan. That's the most exciting time of the year. And I was lucky enough to experience it both as a player and as a fan in the Final Four with the Villanova championships and stuff. And Sonny, we made him an honorary Wildcat, Dan, because Sonny's 2-0 in national championships. He was with us in 16 and in 18. So with his blue Villanova stuff, and the only time I've ever seen him wear anything else besides Syracuse. So
well, I had to go to Houston because Syracuse was in the Final Four, so it was Villanova. When we lost, I got to support Nova. I got to support my Big East team. Then I happened to be lucky enough to go to the 18, and sure enough, Nova was in. I'm like, they got to invite me back if they're in. I'm a lock.
Jay said there's a ticket with your name on it, Sonny.
I'm a lock. Syracuse doesn't want me. We haven't won when I've been there, but we've been a lock when you guys were there.
So last question for you, Dan, I'll let you go. Give us one final thought on your dad and, and how, and the brilliance that he was for developing the conference that arguably was the best conference in the country at that time. I mean, I think it was. Sonny and I are both biased, obviously, as you are too, probably. But give us one last thought on your dad.
Well, I think people would tend to agree, if you watch the 30 for 30, Requiem for the Big East, and those that didn't live through it like we all did and know it so well. I've had friends here in the Midwest now. I live in Indianapolis and in the Big Ten, and even Tom Izzo called me after watching the Requiem for the Big East for the first time and said, man, I knew some of the history of that, but I didn't know all of it. And it's incredible what your dad was able to put together and the personalities and so it's kind of cool that it's lived on and had the success it's had for all these decades. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think it's like, is it real or is it just a movie? Because the actors in the movie, the players, the coaches, the games, the memories that we all have.
Characters.
Unbelievable. I mean, you couldn't, central casting couldn't put that all together, right? So, he probably there was some good fortune in his vision, some things that came together. As you noted earlier, Chuck, I don't know that he was envisioning 3 teams in the Final Four 6 years after the tournament, the conference started. But he did have something that he knew was there, and it ended up being, I think, even bigger and better than he would have imagined. And even today, he would be very pleased. These Gavitt tip-off games, the Big East and the Big Ten are having this week. He'd be very pleased that the season is starting with high-level matchups like we've seen this week and great competition. One of his ideas, among others, was the Big East ACC Challenge that he put together with Gene Corrigan, the ACC commissioner back in the day. And so he always had these creative ideas. He was a very creative thinker and did a lot of cool things for the sport. And so great memories. And it's nice that he's still remembered by you guys and others. We appreciate that.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you sharing them with everybody for so long as a kid. I know that must have been tough. You share, your dad's a coach and then he's the commissioner and he's, he didn't get to spend probably a lot of time as he should, but, we thank you for that. And we thank you very, very much for coming on and spending some time with Sonny and I today. I know you're a busy guy. It's basketball season now, so you're into everything. But thanks again for sharing some time with us, Dan. We really appreciate you coming on.
It was my pleasure, Chuck and Sonny. Great to be with you guys, and hope you enjoy the rest of the season. It's going to be a great one. Gotten off to an awesome start, and appreciate how you cover college basketball. We'll look forward to staying in touch, and thanks for the opportunity.
You
Yeah,
got it. Thanks.
Nova Syracuse in the Madison Square Garden will be a memory of old. This coming up December 7th. So
December
Jimmy V
7th.
Classic. Yeah,
we're
it's
making
gonna be
that
great.
trip. Can't
See,
wait.
that'll be good.
Yeah.
So you've been listening to the Big East Rewind with Sonny Spera and Chuck Everson. The Big East Rewind was produced and directed by Nick Chico Chorus and Daryl Gurney. You can check us out on YouTube. Put Big East Rewind in the search bar, and all of our episodes will come up. Also on Facebook and Instagram and wherever else you find your social media. Thanks a lot for joining us, and have a great night.